Show me a move. Good news, everyone. Don't you little giddy when you see onions have
Hello everyone, my name is Radio Mike and welcome to the Inside of My Mind. So this is just a very quick trailer for my podcast 20th Century Boy, which is a podcast about me. And I realize that sounds really vain, and we're now in the second season of the podcast, the 2020 season of the podcast, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of context before you decide to either listen or not listen. So when I started this podcast in January 2019, the idea of the podcast was to essentially explore my mental health and my obsession with pop culture in podcast form, which was great. Eventually, across 2019, I, for some reason, started doing character comedy on the podcast, which resulted in several interwoven character arcs and very silly humor and very wacky stuff going on for pretty much the majority of the 2019 season. In 2020, I've dialed it back a bit. I'm still talking about pop culture and but more focusing on my day-to-day and week-to-week life as a radio and podcast producer from Melbourne, Australia. I've worked on a bunch of shows in that field. I currently work as a producer on Wil Anderson's Wilosophy podcast, as well as an assistant producer on Hamish and Andy's podcast. I also work on a bunch of other shows with Wil, including his Tofop podcast and Two Guys, One Cup. I've produced a dating podcast called Finding a Unicorn, and I've worked extensively across a bunch of radio shows, such as Triple M's Hot Breakfast and many, many others. I started off as an announcer in Melbourne's community radio scene, and then I worked with Luke and Lewis, two comedians who became two of my biggest supporters and friends who really encouraged me to start this podcast a long time ago. And now this podcast is pretty much my weekly report on what I've been doing and the many blunders of my life working in radio and podcasting, navigating my millennial lifestyle, still exploring the complexities and ever-changing nature of my mental health, and celebrating the nerd and geeky culture that I grew up on. I am an indecisive overthinker, and I gave myself the nickname Radio Mike. I obsess over minute details and obscure popular culture. I am a bundle of neuroticism and anxiety, and if you are anything like me, I think you might enjoy this podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at radio.mike or Twitter at itsradiomike. I have a YouTube channel where I do a bunch of pop culture reviews and discussions and stuff like that. And I'd love for you to check out a bunch of my work. So yeah, thank you so much. Enjoy the show, whatever you choose to listen to from it. Okay, bye.